Welcome to the Coalition Corner podcast, the podcast that discusses issues in the human rights movement and the HIV response across the Caribbean. The podcast is brought to you by the Caribbean Vulnerable Communities, CVC. In this episode, we want to recognize two individuals who have spent over a decade in the HIV response. And we want to look at their contribution, talk to them a little bit about how the response has evolved over the years. So with me in this episode is Andrea ChinSee and Marlon Thompson, who both work at CVC. Marlon, Andrea, thank you so much for joining us on the Coalition Corner podcast. Welcome to the corner. First, just tell our audience a little bit about who is Andrea ChinSee. Let's start with you, Andrea, and then we'll go to Marlon.
Camille, start with a hard question. Who am I? I am, as everyone will see, I am an old lady in the response. And that makes me proud, though, because I've stuck with it for a long time. I'm Andrea ChinSee. I am a mother of one, a grandmother of two, a wife, a friend, a Christian.
A Christian?
Yes.
Marlon?
Yeah, Kaniel.
Yeah, I know it's one of
I
those...
find it so strange that you start off with the difficult questions.
It's one of those difficult questions, you know. It kind of gives you reason to, introspect. And
Yes,
so
reflection going on.
So
here.
basically, introduce yourself to our audience.
So, Marlon Thompson from Jamaica, born and raised in Kingston, son, brother, uncle, someone who essentially grew up in the response, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, let's talk about that. You grew up in the response. You started in the response fresh out of high school.
Yeah.
Why would somebody who just out of high school want to be involved in such serious work?
So how it all started. So I ended high school, I went to UTech, and a course that we had to do at UTech was community service project. And so we had to do volunteer hours at an institution. And a friend of mine, Ricardo Nicholas, I was talking to him about it. I'm not sure where I wanted to go. And he said to me, why not volunteer with Jamaica AIDS Support for Life? And I was like, not a bad idea. And so I went down there, I met the executive director at the time and a couple of the staff, one of whom is still there, Marlon Thompson. She's my kind of adopted mother. And so, it was there that, I started exploring the world of HIV, understanding, start going to workshops and so on. And it kind of piqued my interest because the work, you were seeing direct impact of the work on people's lives. And that felt fulfilling for me. And so I continued.
Mm-hmm. Andrea, how did you come to the response?
Well, it's a long story, so I'm going to cut it short and tell you. I used to move, and because this story is even older than how old Marlon is, some in the late 70s, early 80s, I moved with a group of friends who really, I was going to say dragged me in, but they didn't drag me because I offered a lot. The response was fresh, brand new, actually started by some of these friends. I won't call any names because if I do, I'm going to leave out some and that's not going to be good. But it was when meetings used to be had in secret at people's homes because it was just emerging and it was thought that you could catch it in the air and this kind of stupidness. And so there were this group that decided to mobilize and to get together. And it evolved that in addition to becoming activists, sometimes there were caregivers, and there's the story of the JAS hospice because treatment was not available directly at the hospitals and so on.
What were things like, though, back in those days when, it was the early days of the HIV epidemic and, a lot of people were scared because they didn't know what was happening? How difficult was it to basically put a response together?
That's exactly it, Camille. It was very difficult because it was an emerging issue and there was not a lot of clarity around it yet. And so people, human nature, you think the worst. And people used to think you could catch it just from coming into the room, touching the person, using the same utensils and all of that. So this group of what I consider very brave activists set out to mobilize and to begin to expose and to make things change, to bring about change. That's what the whole activism was about. And, you know, the stigma and discrimination were at its height in those days. And you kind of even had to hide to make people not know you were in the response. It was not easy in the early days. But thank God that's all changed.
Oh, speaking of change, Marlon, just looking at your journey in the response started so young. What are some of the things that you've seen that have changed over the years? The evolution of the response through your eyes.
Well, certainly there has been a kind of a pivoting from a more from a more individualized approach to a more collective approach. So in the earlier days, there was a huge emphasis on peer education type work. So peer going out, reaching persons, doing testing, and so on and so forth. But since about 2015, 2016, there's been kind of a pivot to addressing the whole enabling environment, because while you are empowering persons, testing them, asking them to use a condom and so on, they still have to go out there and interact with the wider society and all the ills that happen there. And so the response has kind of shifted from just addressing a person on a one-on-one basis to try and addressing the enabling environment. So there's a huge thrust now around human rights issues, trying to sensitize healthcare workers, going on to sensitizing police officers, nurses, security guards, just a whole host of things that so that while you're empowering me, you're supporting me to be able to go about my business without all the barriers that usually exist.
Andrea, you started in the 80s. So this was before treatment and care is where it's at now. So you must have lost people, friends. Walk us through that in terms of just the emotional roller coaster that this must have been for you.
Yes, Khalil, it certainly has been. And one of the things that really cemented my being in and maybe even staying in this long, one of my dearest and best friends, Michael, of blessed memory, I guess in the very early 80s, was HIV positive, and he struggled through. Along with him, I then became a member of JASL, a volunteer initially at JASL, and met some of the most wonderful people who, again, were in my past. And I can tell you, it has been a long journey, and I've lost, as you said, a lot of friends. And perhaps that is what has kept me in it for so long, just to honor their memory and to hope that I will be around long enough to see those losses that probably in the earlier days we could have avoided, but because healthcare wasn't there, the discrimination was so high, nobody wanted to touch. Or I think maybe that's why I'm around so long, because so many friends, and being involved in JASL has really exposed me to meeting and being with members of the community, and therefore being exposed to the losses that I have had.
Marlon, in terms of the field work and going out in the field back then, tell us a little bit about that experience, and because it's about trying to get through to people, oftentimes young people, to try to convince them to, hey, use protection, practice safer sex.
So we have come a far way in terms of field work. I remember nights I used to, we do onward granting at CVC, and in the early days of doing onward granting was a heavy focus around peer education type work. And so some of the grants, they were reaching sex workers. So, and I had to do validation. And so you'd see me in Old Harbor at 1 o'clock in the night out there when the peer educators are engaging with sex workers in Old Harbor, Polyroyal, all of those places. I can also say that the response has taken me places that my poor mother would be surprised to know I went.
That you wouldn't readily admit that you would go on your own.
Back road.
Back road, all of those places. It's through this response that I've been exposed to those kind of places. And to be honest, I have actually, there's some of these persons who I've interacted with it over the years. It has been such a pleasurable interaction that every now and then, whenever we buck up each other, they call to me, "What, long time in the see you still there?" You know, that kind of a thing. And that feels good because it feels like you're impacting people's lives.
But getting the message out, though, how receptive are these people to what you're saying and what you're bringing?
Context is important. So sometimes if a sex worker is busy doing, trying to broke our ducks or earn a living.
Right. Explain.
Yeah, in Jamaican terms, she hasn't received a customer for that night.
Right.
Trying to engage her around safer sex practice is a no-no because her focus is on
getting that first customer,
earning her bread because she has her family at home to go and take care of. And so you have to keep it very short, very brief. And on a more relaxed night, they'll sit and talk with you as long as you want. So you have to understand the different dynamics and make sure that you're not, make sure that your messaging, while you're going there to give your message, you understand their context and how they operate so that you don't affect their livelihood. Because the truth is
at the end of the day, they're trying to make a living.
You go to some parties trying to educate persons about safe sex practices. You know that people go to party to enjoy themselves, not to be lectured on safe sex. And so you know that going there, you have to keep the message very short, very tight, and succinct, so that you can pass on something very concrete to them, and they can go about their business and keep enjoying themselves and dash out.
And that's short. Andrea, you've been in it since
before you born.
A really long time. What would you say has been some of the most striking things to you in terms of how things have changed?
Honestly, Kanil, in a funny way, the thing that has changed the most is the thing that still remains. And I hope Marlon might agree with me. Stigma and discrimination still abounds. It has come such a long way that people later on in the response may not even recognize and understand how much it used to be. But so it was at a stage where it prevented care and it prevented people accepting anyone. It has moved now where it can be discussed in the open. Here we are. And it certainly has taken on a new dimension. However, it still remains stigma and discrimination. I think Marlon might.
Yeah, that's one of the
it still
prevailing
is here,
challenges.
But it has changed. It has come a long way.
It has evolved.
Yes.
As in.
Yes.
Explain that.
That's what I mean when I say come a long way.
Are you saying it has taken on different faces?
It has different
different approaches.
Yes, faces and phases.
To stigma and discrimination.
So I remember certainly from my growing up, my aunt had a neighbor who was HIV positive. And while it wasn't, I know of this person experiencing very public stigma and discrimination person. Oh, it's that kind of person, that kind of a thing. At my aunt's house, he would sometimes come and ask for food or ice water or something of the sort. And she would never tell us not to give. We would give. I would interact with him normally, but as soon as he left, we'd throw out the dishes.
Yes, everything had to be
Yeah.
sanitized.
As in you throw away.
Yes,
Yeah, those are
yes,
condemned.
Yes.
Wow.
We had to throw them away.
That's how it was. It was as bad as people not coming into the same room
Yeah.
with someone who was a known HIV person.
And so now, where it has evolved with the times, where you're seeing people, while they're not telling you to your face, you're seeing the online aspects of stigma and discrimination. Oh, the various social media platforms, you see people identifying persons and outing their HIV status, real or perceived, but you see that all the time. And so that's part of the evolution of the stigma and discrimination that we're challenging, where, it's not okay to say it to the person's face, but it's still not okay for you to do it online in those kind of spaces.
Working with CBC, you do a lot of training on this, human rights training, legal literacy trainings. How different is it across the region? Or it's similar? How different or similar is it?
Well, on the issue of human rights, it's pretty similar. It's amazing how many persons don't actually know what their rights are. Even outside of human rights, their legal rights. And that goes for the rights bearers as well as the duty bearer. Rights holders as well as the duty bearer. So the regular citizens don't know their rights. And those who are charged with providing services or being servants to the people don't know the rights that people have. And so they oftentimes trample on their rights. For example, a very common one that whenever we do sensitization with police officers, healthcare workers, and so on, there's this misconception that being gay is illegal in Jamaica. When in truth and in fact, the law doesn't say that being gay is illegal in Jamaica. It says anal sex, and the language around anal sex, the language around anal sex is not limited to just man and a man. It involves a man having sex with a man in the anus, or a man having sex with a woman in the anus. That is illegal. And so the law doesn't say, oh, you being gay is outright illegal. No, it doesn't. It's very specific around a sexual act.
How effective, Andrea, I'll come back to you in a sec. How effective are these trainings, though, that CBC undertake, the legal literacy training, in the bigger scheme of things?
So we're seeing a shift in, before the human rights training, persons were out there doing media monitoring and so on. But with the human rights training, we're seeing where persons are addressing human rights issues head on. And so increased police training, increase in healthcare workers training. We're seeing increase in social media campaign informing persons about what their rights are. We're also seeing an increase in the number of cases that are being documented in our shared incident database, which is a human rights monitoring mechanism that CBC developed in 2016.
We'll come to the shared incident database in a bit. Andrea, in terms of, well, you already alluded to why you've been in the response this long, about the impact that you're able to do. How has this impacted you, though, as a person who has been journeying down this road for so long?
Yes. In many ways, as you can imagine. But I would think that what stands out for me as the most impactful, being in the response for so long and interacting with so many people, has taught me really, has been more beneficial to me maybe than to how much I have contributed. I have learned to be not as judgmental as I used to be. It has taught me a world of patience. It has taught me to be more accepting And it certainly has helped me to, in my own personal journey of carrying through my motto of service to God through service to others, by being able to, even though I'm in the back room of the response, I believe that I am serving others by my having been there so long and by what I do.
Mm-hmm. And in the back room, you mean you're not on the front
I'm
line?
Not on the front lines
in the
of
field
the
doing
yes,
stuff. But,
absolutely.
But you still do critical work, because if the back room isn't functioning, then the people on the front line won't be able to do what they do. You've been with CVC since how long now?
Day one, from when we opened the doors. In fact, I was involved. We started officially on the 1st of May, officially in terms of opening an office on 1st of May 2011. But there was a little office with Ivan, as you know, and Ian at Musgrave Avenue for about 2 years. I used to assist there and help out there. But officially opening the doors from day one on May 2011. And then I've been in the response, as I said, from the early 80s. I have been with JASL from then as a volunteer, as this, that, and the other head cook and bottle washer.
So
I'm on the board.
You've had several roles
throughout the years.
Across the response.
Name it, and I've done it.
Marlon, how has being in the response changed your life, you think?
Well, I think the response I've essentially grown up in the response. And I've said this.
And you're not very old.
And I'm not very old. But I've literally grown up in this response. Interacting with some of my friends, and I tell them some of the stuff that I'm doing, and I'm like, how did you know all of this? It's through this response. I've been exposed to so many trainings, so many sessions, opportunities for learning and growth in this response. It's amazing. Things that I've never, ever done at the university level where you're supposed to be learning. Mm-hmm. I came into this response and learn and know. I never did. I studied human resource management, and I'm doing human rights, legal literacy, those kind of training that I was never taught to do at the university level. And so in that sense, I've grown in the response. But on a personal level, I think the thing that the response has, impact of the response on me is patience, tolerance, and accepting people for who they are.
You know, see there, Marlon and I haven't discussed that, and we basically are saying the same thing.
Yeah.
Non-judgmental, patience,
tolerance, and accepting people for who they are. Like a number of persons in the whole issue around trans is pretty new, and
controversial,
and I myself
and evolving, really,
and constantly. That's key.
It's constantly
really
evolving, and I myself have to, whenever persons come forward, if I said something that might be offensive to them at that point in time, I'm the first to apologize.
Because it's a learning curve.
It's a learning curve for me, and ask them, how can I do different? What can I do? What can I do differently to not offend other persons with my engagement? And constantly learning and evolving and keep.
Do you both feel like within your personal life, day to day, you're like advocates, or just it just comes naturally, just being an advocate for the human rights, HIV response?
Oh yeah, so a regular conversation with your friends and family, you find yourself always educating, empowering.
And you spot the stigma and discrimination.
And address it as like, no, that's not right, and explain to them why it's not right. That kind of a thing. It comes natural with the work that we do.
Yeah, and the truth of the matter is, Camille, that although, as I said at the beginning, and keep repeating myself, the stigma and discrimination has come a long way and has greatly reduced, there are pockets in the society that don't have a clue. And when you get into conversations with them, it really is a learning and a teaching. And if you want to begin to make some impact with them, you have to be so careful how you deliver, because there are pockets in the society that don't have a clue how people in our response live and what they go through. And
So it's constant awareness and education.
Yes, education, exposure.
What more needs to be done, though, Andrea, in terms of getting people more exposed to just the mere facts of what's happening?
Kanil, I think we can only continue on the path that we have already begun. We have to continue training, continue exposing. The more people know and the more people we whittle away and the more people we reduce stigma and discrimination with, each one teach one. And we have, as Marlon said, we are pivoting all the time. How can we improve on exposing to training the groups that are vital to interacting with our key populations? For me, we just have to continue on the path, keep observing our successes and constantly upgrade and change for improvement.
Why are you still in the response, Marlon?
Why am I?
Why are you still here? Why are you still in the response?
For the same reason why I started. I see the direct impact of the work that I'm doing on people's lives. And that in and of itself is very fulfilling. When you can say, okay, I'm stressed doing this work, but I've seen where this work has impacted on the lives of these people. It's fulfilling. And that's why I continue to do what I do.
Andrea, before you leave the response, what are two big things that you would love to see happen?
One I can answer very quickly. I would love to see the day in the next year, 2, 5, however, when we no longer speak behind our hands. You know, I have HIV. I would like to see it now get to the stage where it's like the common cold and it's not even mentioned. I would love to see it, the stigma and discrimination reach to 99% eradicated. I don't know if that will ever happen. But it's a dream, it's a wish that I have. So I'd like to see that happen, where nobody even has to say, I feel as though I'm being discriminated against. That's one thing. And the second thing is, I would like to probably see some more recognition. There are a lot of people in the response, Kanil, and I think some people just get swept under the carpet.
Right.
I don't know how, but I would love to see people in the response being acknowledged more, because a lot of people have contributed to bringing it to where it is at now.
Speaking of being recognized and being acknowledged, Marlon, you were recently recognized by Jamaica's Ministry of Health and Wellness with the High Individual Value Award.
Individual Value Award.
Right. That's a big, recognition,
Very
because
big.
stalwarts in the movement have been recognized with that award. How did that make you feel?
I mean, I was pleasantly surprised, but very much appreciative, because it's good when you're awarded, but when you see the caliber of persons that have been awarded before you with that same award, it means something. It makes you feel a little special. And so I felt really good on that day.
Did you go up and be like, I'd like to thank God and my mom?
Like the athletes.
Yeah,
First of all.
like a Grammy speech or Oscar speech.
There wasn't room for acceptance speech, but
you would have.
I would have.
Well, yeah, do that. No, I'll give you 2 seconds to thank people who have contributed to that.
Firstly, I'd like to thank everybody know Mama Pat. Always there, always supporting. She's like that wing beneath my wings, always there. The staff at CVC for supporting, for believing in me, for providing me with the opportunities to do what I've been able to do. Ricardo Nicholas, who was the one who kind of exposed me to the world of HIV with that recommendation. Who else? Ingrid Cox in the early days.
Yes.
Ian McKnight.
Yes.
You know, those are some of my mentors in the early days who, they supported me, guided me through some very tough times sometimes.
You spoke about your mom and your face just lit up. that's a special relationship.
Oh, yeah.
How was it when you first told her that, hey mom, I'm gonna go and do this HIV human rights response and be a defender of the vulnerable people across the region?
So it wasn't a difficult conversation. In fact, she was very supportive. My mother supports me in doing almost everything, as long as she thinks it's
Spoil you.
Just spoil it. well, you know, we boys, our moms
Yes,
spoil us,
yes,
but we're not the first to admit it.
Yes.
So
not spoil. I mean, it's 4 of us, 4 boys. So she was, when I explained to her, once it makes sense to her and it's not exposing me to undue harm or danger, she's gung ho. So it wasn't a difficult conversation. And she has always, you know, a very interesting thing. And I was talking to a friend of mine about it recently, that growing up, we were always exposed to persons of varying background. I recently was telling my mother that, you know, I think you're one of the reasons why I'm so tolerant to persons with mental health issues.
Problems, right?
Because there's always somebody coming by, stopping by, and we're like, okay.
Not so right.
You know that they're not so righted, but they were always welcome, always around, and so you learn to develop certain tolerance to differences and so on through her.
Andrea, you've spoken about being a Christian and religion. You're Anglican, right? Tell us a little bit about how involved you are in church.
Oh gosh. I would say very involved. I tell people all the time, perhaps if I had thought of doing it earlier, I would be a priest. So I
priest?
try. Yes.
Wow.
Yep. If I come back in the next life, that's what I want to be. I'm very involved in my church. I attend St. Andrew Parish Church. I have been there, done that. I've held every post that you can think of in the church. And even when I'm not holding a post is just that it has a title. But I'm always, always, always contributing, because I come back to my motto, service to God through service to others. So anything I can do for anybody, I seek it out. Sometimes I hear myself. I was asked to do a very big job a couple months ago, and I heard myself saying yes out of my mouth, but my brain was saying no. And then after I was finished, I wrote a long letter saying, sorry, I apologize. I really meant to say no. Well, it was too late. I am very involved in my church, and I sometimes have to fight the battle of educating on this HIV response, because, as I said earlier, there are a lot of people who are still not where we are at, not even halfway where we are at in terms of...
Because it's about the exposure.
Yes. And
issue.
the openness and the non-judgmental behavior that I have gotten myself from being in the response.
Because, as you said, openness about the issue, because working with CVC and working with CVC over the years and working in the response, you've been working with LGBT people.
Absolutely.
A previous episode of this podcast, we examined the issue of can an individual be gay and Christian? So I know there.
So the challenges that
around that.
The complexities are
very complex.
So, but
and varying, you know.
But in terms of your church, though, is that I don't want to say a pushback, but do people look at you with like a side eye, be like, oh yeah, she works with the gays?
Absolutely. I have people who are openly voiced. I can't talk to you about that, for you're one of them.
One of them.
Okay. And yes, it breaks my heart to have to say it, but unfortunately, that's what I'm saying. The level of stigma and discrimination is still there. In the faith-based community. Not just in my church, in all the denominations. Maybe, Camille, maybe it's where stigma and discrimination exists the most in the churches. But I know the faith-based community has some good people in it as well who are trying to reduce the stigma and discrimination.
Marlon, earlier you mentioned the shared incident database, SID. Just tell our viewers and listeners a little bit about SID, what it is, how it works, what it does.
So the shared incident database, affectionately called SID, is a human rights monitoring mechanism. It's a virtual human rights monitoring mechanism where it documents incidences of human rights violation. And we have user members across, we have almost 60 user members across the English, French, Spanish, and Dutch-speaking Caribbean. And what it does is that we train them on how to effectively document human rights violations. And so when the client comes in and they're doing their usual service, we train them on how to screen these clients for human rights violation. And so once the client indicate that, hey, I have experienced a rights violation, we go through the process. We have a protocol to show how to document human rights violations effectively. We go through that with them, and they go through that whole step of taking the client through that whole process of documenting and then inputting that database into SID. And that data is used to inform advocacy, program planning, and so on and so forth. We're actually in the process of doing another iteration of our regional data analysis, and so that should be coming out in a month or so
Early
from now.
next year.
It's pretty critical and important in terms of capturing that data and having that information, because while you have anecdotal stories, I mean, somebody might say, this happened to me, and then you might say, oh yeah, I heard from 2 other people, and then we're like, okay, 3 people in Guyana said this happened. But when you have the SID, you can capture this, analyze it, and look at the bigger picture from that.
Yeah, one of the reasons the shared incident database came about was that when civil society did their advocacy to decision makers, oftentimes they were confronted with this question about, that's only affecting a handful of persons.
Right.
And so now with the shared incident database, we're able to show that this problem is actually a lot more widespread than we initially thought. It's not just a 1 or 2 persons. It's a more widespread issue. And so it needs
attention,
actions, or it needs it needs to be addressed at a wider level. So the shared incident database enables us to be able to do that. One of the things I often said is that when you do advocacy, those anecdotal stories,
they can only go so far.
Anecdotal stories oftentimes address the heart.
Yes.
Yeah? It tugs at the heart. But with the statistics, it tugs at the mind.
Yeah.
And we need hearts and minds to make more meaningful impact. And so we continue to collect the anecdotal stories, but we are supporting that with the data behind the shared incident database.
And policymakers can use
the
this
data will help the policymakers to know where to go next. That's what it's there.
Yeah.
We just have a couple minutes left. Andrea, you've been with CVC from the get-go. Let's talk a little bit about Robert Carr. Just for our viewers and listeners, Robert Carr is the founder of CVC.
Yes.
Just reflect a little bit for us on who Robert was.
Okay, I came in contact with Robert before CVC. As I mentioned earlier, I was first with JASL and still am with JASL. Robert was...
What's your role with JASL?
I'm on the board.
No,
but I've started from...
Jamaica AIDS Support for Life.
Jamaica AIDS Support for Life. I'm on the board now, have been for a long time, but previously I was a volunteer, as I said very early in the show, and moved on to various things. I used to do training and all of that, till I'm on the board now. And over the years, Robert was in the response as well. A very passionate, very strong advocate. And then he became the ED for JASL. So I then worked much closer with him and had the pleasure of, I tell people, and this is an anecdote, I tell people I have emails to this day between Robert and I that he would send at all hours of the night. Robert worked at night, 1, 2, 3. And he was very impatient, and he had wanted things done, and he would come at you at any hour of the night. So we had the just experience with him, and then he moved on, and as you already said, was the founder of CVC. I didn't actually have the pleasure of interacting with him on the first day of opening CVC because he was overseas. And then we, shortly after CVC opened, lost him, which was a big loss to CVC and, of course, the response and the community in general. But he had to move on.
Mm-hmm. All right. Final question, because we're pretty much all the time. It's a twofold question. First, what's your hope for the response over the next 10 years? Not just Jamaica, but the region. Let's talk about the Caribbean. We're trying to achieve the 95, which is 95% of people who are HIV positive know their status, 95% on treatment of those people on treatment, and then 95% of those people who are on treatment virally suppressed. So what's your hope over the next 10 years? But before that, I would like you to answer, what's the thing over the years and the evolution of the movement that, looking back to now, warms your heart the most? What changed has warmed your heart the most, and what's your hope for the future? So I'm asking you to look back and then look forward.
So Andrea mentioned to you that in the early days, like, it was very hush-hush. Mm-hmm. Meetings were being held, and it couldn't have a sign to say, this is a Jamaica AIDS Support for Life meeting. Now going into public spaces and seeing even Jamaica AIDS Support for Life having their gender-based violence march every year in Kingston, and you don't hear the usual
howls of
disapproval and so on and so forth. That warms my heart. You see change happening. In terms of what I would like to see for the movement in Jamaica, regionally and internationally, one, in order for us to get to the point of our testing goals, viral suppression, and so on, I first would like to see, we have seen shifts, but I'd like to see a lot more shift in terms of the stigma and discrimination, reduction in the stigma and discrimination, because I think with that, then it would address those goals. And the ultimate goal that I would like to see is for there to be a cure for HIV. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thanks, Andrea.
Oh, okay. I thought Marlon was speaking for both of us, because that's I can
back.
Only say ditto. Looking forward is basically, I've repeated myself throughout this podcast, because the stigma and discrimination, and Marlon articulated it very well. It is my dream and my wish, before I shut my eyes, that it's no longer there. People speak about it as though it's the common cold. And therefore don't even speak about it at all. So that's my real wish, and it has come a long way. I don't want to deny that. I want everybody to know that from the days when we had to meet in people's house and you couldn't let anybody know you were in the response, I've known people who were stoned on the road because of it. So we have come a long way. I would like to know that it's just treated as anything else that's passing. And yes, I also want, and I think we're getting there, Marlon. I'm very hopeful.
Very hopeful.
That there will be
towards a cure.
Towards a cure. We're at U equals U now, or getting there. And if we're there,
U equals U is undetectable equals
untransmittable.
Which means if you can't detect the viral load, then you can't transmit.
So that for me is a big step towards it, and therefore we must be able to make the other steps to making it a reality, a cure.
Thank you both so much. I I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you.
Marlon Thompson is Technical Program Officer at CVC. Andrea, ChinSee is Human Resources and
Contracts.
and contracts at CVC. But trust me, she does so much more. She does everything. She's what do you call
That's
it?
true.
Head cook
and bottle washer. It's true.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the CVC Coalition Corner podcast. I'm CVC's communications consultant, Camille Gale. Until next time, take care.